Reading closely and writing to learn. Poetry, poets, and becoming writers. Unit 1, Lesson 7. Guiding questions. What makes a poem a poem? What inspires writers to write poetry? Learning targets. I can summarize pages 31 through 41 of Love That Dog based on evidence from the novel. I can explain what Jack understands about poetry based on evidence from Love That Dog. And finally, I can identify characteristics of poetry by analyzing the poems Street Music and The Apple. Love That Dog by Sharon Creech. While you read, think about the following questions. What makes a poem a poem? What inspires writers to write poetry? While you read, take notice of what Jack is learning about poetry as he writes his own. And finally, follow along with your book if you have it. Page 31, February 15th. I like that poem we read today about street music in the city. My street is not in the middle of the city, so it doesn't have that loud music of horns and trucks, clash, flash, screech. My street is on the edge of a city. Page 32, and it has quiet music most of the time. Wisp, meow, swish. My street is a thin one, with houses on both sides, and my house is the white one with the red door. There's not too much traffic on my street, not like in the middle of a city. We play in the yards and sometimes in the streets, but only if grown up or the big kids are out there too. And they will shout, "Car," if they see a car coming down our street. At both ends of our street are yellow signs that say, "Caution, children at play," but sometimes the cars pay no attention and speed down the road as if, page 34, as if they are in a big hurry with many miles to go before they sleep. Page 35, February 21st. That was so great, those poems you showed us, where the words make the shape of the thing that the poem is about. Like the one about an apple that was shaped like an apple, and the one about the house that was shaped like a house. My brain was popping when I was looking at those poems. I never knew a poet person could do that funny kind of thing. Page 36, February 26th. I tried one of those poems that looks like what it's about. My Yellow Dog by Jack. Head, add, he, I, add, y, e, nose, d, head, nose, ear, head, sniff, slobber, body, tail, low body, woolly, wag, yellow body, yell body, yellow body, leg, paw, leg, paw. Page 38, March 1st. Yes, you can type up the yellow dog poem that looks like a dog, but this time keep the spaces exactly the same, and maybe it would look really good on yellow paper. Maybe you could put my name on it, but only if you want to, only if you think it looks good enough. Page 39, March 7th. I was a little embarrassed when people said things to me like, "Neat poem, Jack," and "How'd you think of that, Jack?" And I really liked the one you put up about the tree that is shaped like a tree. Not a fake-looking tree, but like a real tree with straggly branches. But I want to know, who is the... Page 40. But I want to know, who is the anonymous poet in our class? Who wrote that, and why didn't he or she want to put his or her name on it? Was it like me when I didn't think my words were poems? Maybe you will tell the anonymous tree poet that his or her tree poem is really a poem. Really, and a good poem too. Getting the gist and writing a summary. Take a look in your workbook on page 4. You'll be looking at the 3 rows, February 15th, February 21st through February 26th, and March 1st through March 7th. These are all found in your book, pages 31 through 41, in the section that we just read. We're We're going to get started with the first row, dated February 15th, found on pages 31 through 34 in your notebook. In the second column, you're recording the gist statement or the summary statement. Basically, what that means is you're just retelling in a very short amount of space what happens in that section. So to do that, you ask the question, who, and then what happens. This section is about Jack, and what happens in this part of the text? What is it that Jack does in this part of the text? And I want you to answer that second question on your own. In the third column, you're going to provide evidence from the text to support your summary or your just statement. So in this case, you'd be looking for evidence to support the fact that Jack writes a poem that is inspired by the poem Street Music. And so you're going to look for evidence directly out of the text to include to support your statement that you made in the column 2. Pause the video if you need more time to look for evidence. Okay, now let's look at the row for February 21st through February 22nd. Again, to write the summary of the gist statement, you're going to ask yourself who or what is this section about and what happens in this section. Again, the who is Jack, and then what happens to Jack or what does Jack do, that's what you're going to answer on your own. Now you're going to add evidence in the third column to support your summary statement. So you're going to support the fact that Jack learned about shape poems and he wrote his own poem called The Yellow Dog. So you're going to find evidence to support that summary or just statement. Pause the video if you need more time to look for evidence. Okay, the last row dated March 1st through March 7th. To record your gist or summary statement, you're going to ask yourself who and what happened in that section. So the who, of course, is Jack. What happens to Jack or what does Jack say or do in that text? That's what you're going to answer on your own to provide the gist or the summary statement. Once you have your gist or your summary statement, you can go ahead and look back in the text, pages 38 through 41, to find evidence to support your gist statement. So in this section, we know that Jack asks his teacher about the tree poet, one of his classmates, and so you can look for evidence for that. We also know that he lets his teacher type up his Yellow Dog poem and put his name on it. So if either of those were your gist statement, then you would want to support those things with evidence right out of the text. Pause the video if you need more time to look for evidence. Now we'll look at the poems Street Music and The Apple. While you read, think about the following questions. What makes a poem a poem? What inspires writers to write poetry? Street Music by Arnold Adolph. The city, the always noise grinding up from the subways underground, slamming from bus tires and taxi horns and engines of cars and trucks in all vocabularies of clash, flash, screeching, hot metal, language combinations as planes overhead roar, an orchestra of rolling drums and battle blasts assaulting my ears with the always noise of this city, street music. The Apple by S.C. Rigg. Stem. Apple, 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 apple. Apple yum, apple yum, apple yum, apple. Juicy, 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 juicy. Crunchy, 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 crunchy. Red, yellow, green. Red, yellow, green. Red, yellow, green, red. Apple, 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 apple. Apple, 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 apple. Yum, delicious, yum, delicious, yum, delicious, yum, delicious, yum. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 wormy, worm, yuck, yuck, yum, yum. Yum, 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 wormy, worm, yuck, yuck, yum, yum. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, delicious, yum, delicious, yum, delicious, yum, delicious. Apple, 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 apple. Apple, 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 apple. Apple, 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 apple. Red, yellow, green. Red, yellow, green, red. Crunchy, 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 crunchy. Juicy, 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 juicy. Apple, apple. Now we're going to talk about what we think Jack has learned about poetry from the poems Street Music and The Apple. Focus question. What has Jack learned about poetry? In the left-hand column, we're writing down what Jack writes, and then in the right-hand column, we're writing what we can infer about what Jack has learned based on what he writes. First row. My street is not in the middle of the city, so it doesn't have that loud music of horns and trucks, clash, flash, screech, wisp, meow, swish. So based on this section of the text that we've taken out, this is what Jack writes. What can we infer that Jack has learned about poetry? And you're going to answer that by using the sentence starter. What Jack has learned about poetry here is, in row 2, we write down that Jack has written a poem called My Yellow Dog, and it's in the shape of a dog. So what we can infer about Jack is that he has learned something about poetry. What has he learned? So you're going to use the sentence starter. What Jack has learned about poetry here is blank. And row 3, head, head, body, 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 tail, tail, yellow, yellow, leg, leg. Again, this is what Jack has written. What has Jack learned about poetry, and how we know that because of what he's written here. So you're going to use that sentence starter again. What Jack has learned about poetry here is blank. To fill in these blanks, think back to what we noticed about the poems Street Music and The Apple, because these poems were the inspiration for the poem Jack writes about his street and the poem Yellow Dog. So think about what features we noticed of those poems, and then that's what Jack has learned about poetry, and it's evident in his writing. Pause the video now to complete this work. Synthesize. Synthesize means to put all this information together that you have just learned. Explain what we can infer Jack has learned about poetry based on what he writes. So very similar to what we have up above, but now you're just going to put it all together. You can use the sentence starter. After reading Jack's poems inspired by Street Music and The Apple, I can infer that Jack has learned a lot about poetry. He has learned about blank, and then you would fill in the blank with all the things, all the features of poetry that Jack has learned, and then you would back that up with evidence from his poems. You can pause the video now in order to take more time to complete this response. Be sure to use those features that we noticed in the poems. Let's review. What makes a poem a poem? In Lesson 2, you learned that poems have structure, which includes lines and stanzas, stanzas, remember, are a group of lines, kind of like a paragraph. Poems can be free verse, like the Red Wheelbarrow. And poems use lots of imagery, words or phrases that help an author imagine what is happening in the poem or visualize what's happening in the poem. In Lesson 3, we read the poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and in that poem we noticed that there was a lot of rhyming words. There was some repetition in the last two lines. The poem had a regular rhythm to it, and also it was a narrative poem. It was a poem that told the story of a man who wants to stay in the woods but cannot because he has many miles to go. After reading our novel today and the poem Dog by Valerie Worth, we've noticed some more characteristics of poetry that we can add to our chart. First of all, the structure of Dog had no stanzas but lots of lines. There was also a lot of punctuation that helped the reader know when to pause. So that can be a big part of poetry. This poem was also a free verse poem. It had no rhyme or regular rhythm to it. And the author uses a lot of imagery or words that create pictures in the mind when she wrote things like lolls, limp tongue, long chin, yawns, chops, sighs. All of those words create a picture in the reader's mind. And just to review, let's add to our chart what makes a poem a poem. In Lesson 7, we read Street Music, and in that poem we noticed the structure was irregular. It was not normal. It was a free verse poem. The poem used a lot of onomatopoeia, which is words that imitate sound, like grinding, clash, screeching, roar, blasts. And then metaphor, which is a comparison that suggests one thing is the same as another. So in this poem, planes were compared to the sound of an orchestra. So those were the two things that were being compared. They were saying planes were an orchestra. And also in Lesson 7, we read The Apple by S.C. Riggs. And this one was very different from the other poems because it was a structure or a concrete poem. It was words written in the shape of what the poem is about. Okay, so we have the apple, and then Jack wrote his poem, the shape poem, My Yellow Dog. End of Lesson 7.